Welcome to the Mystic Fool's Journey podcast. I'm Anna, and this is Ruth.
Howdy.
This is an occult history podcast, and today we're diving into sympathetic magic. Let's jump on in.
Yeah, let's do it up. So basically, I got into this whole topic after I heard something somewhere about contagious magic, which is, I feel like, a pretty self-explanatory term. It's the idea that stuff for people who've touched each other or have kept some sort of a permanent connection. So if someone gets their hands on your hair, nails, teeth, clothes, they could use that stuff to work some magic on you. Like, I think we've all seen in the movies where the troubled heroine has to get her hands on a lock of, like, the love interest's hair so the town witch can cast the love potion or whatever. That's, like, contagious magic.
Yeah, that's a classic example.
For sure. And so I was thinking, like, what's up with that? And how did we start carving out these little, like, niches in magic? And, like, similar to when we talk about left hand and right hand path magic, I wanted to know what the equal opposite to contagious magic is and who decided that it deserved its own category.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think we've chatted about this on the side about how, like, we could just have a whole season of episodes that just do, like, top level, like, different types of magic, because the deeper you dive, like, the more fragmented it gets, and, like, we have more and more, like, versions now. Like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And each one kind of has its own little niche culture to it. It'd be pretty cool to dive into.
Oh, yeah.
So I started going down the rabbit hole and found out that the first person to categorize this type of magic was a man named Sir James George Frazer, who wrote an incredibly popular book titled, okay, I don't exactly know how to pronounce this, The Golden Bough? Okay, great.
Mm-hmm. I think you could say bow, but, you know.
I was going to say The Golden Boof.
Oh, well, okay, I think bow or bow would either be the more correct versions. For our listeners at home, it's spelled B-O-U-G-H, like, you know, like a tree branch.
Yeah.
A bough. Yeah.
Yeah, bough makes sense. Boof would be fun, though.
Boof would be more fun. You're right.
So the book is all about trying to figure out what all these ancient religions had in common. Basically, Fraser says that a lot of those old-time religions were basically the same and all celebrating and sometimes even sacrificing a super important guy, like a sacred king or something. He also says some crazy stuff about how, like, most early religions were fertility cults, which kind of intrigued me, but that's off track.
Well, I mean, like, okay, so you said a lot in that. See, we jumped from, like, yeah, he would, like, talk about how religions were super similar, and then they, like, kill a guy, and then they're all about having sex. Like, so let's just, like, back it up a minute.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so, like, from my understanding, Fraser was, through this book, he was trying to do several things, like too many things in one book. So he had this hypothesis that all civilizations go through phases where they first believe in magic, and then as they advance, they would, like, go more into organized religion, and then if they advance further, they get into, like, believing in science. And he did say that, like, there could be something after science, but, like, he couldn't imagine it, essentially, because, I don't know, we're not there yet. But in trying to discuss this whole hypothesis, he was trying to also catalog, like, a bunch of different cultures, myths, and folklore, and trying to identify universal symbols and motifs across all of them by comparing them, which is a big task, first of all. And then also it's kind of like, it kind of became reductive. Like, he was trying to prove himself right rather than looking at what was actually there. So some examples of those supposedly shared symbols or sacred symbols are, like, what you mentioned, the sacred king. So I think everybody got in an uproar because he kind of, like, used Jesus as an example of, like, the killing of a sacred king as a motif, and everyone was like, oh, how dare you, like, relate Christianity to paganism.
Yeah, right.
That's a whole different episode, by the way, which is totally fine. But another one that people might have heard of is the scapegoat is probably the most specific one because we, like, use that in everyday life. But, like, a scapegoat was an actual ritual where people would transfer their sins to a goat and then they either sacrifice the goat or, like, release the goat into the wild so as to, like, purify the person whose sins were placed on it. So, like, he was specifically trying to prove himself right and find all these, like, symbols. And so he, like, started to make some really weird hypotheses to make it all work. Like, oh, we're all actually fertility cults. And it's like, oh, I think you really left out some details there, bud. But
Yeah, he really tried so hard to make it work. I think he even like revised. There were 12 different versions of this book. He kept revising the book over and over, and like, yeah, it was crazy. But this book came out way back in 1890 and was pretty groundbreaking for its time because it looked at religion in a whole new way, kind of like a modern perspective. He was really challenging a lot of people's beliefs, and you know, I feel like he did some good in that, possibly. And you know what? It had a big yes. And you know what? It had a big influence on the literature scene in Europe back then. People were talking about it a ton. But nowadays his works are largely rejected by modern anthropology and religious studies. It kind of sounds like most of his writings are considered like armchair anthropology because it lacks the structure most academic works have. He also just, like you said, really tries hard to force the religions to fit his ideas in a way that totally glosses over the individuality of each culture and religion. But it does still have a ton of popularity in New Age circles.
Yeah, it did have a really big effect on New Age circles, for better or for worse, for the poor cultures that he wrote about. So I think that, yeah, we've learned that people can just publish things like willy-nilly. And just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's verified or has like evidence. I think previous listeners might recall when we chatted about Dijebeline when we were discussing tarot, where he basically published a bunch of essays in like 1781, 1780s. And in one of them, he just like straight up claimed that tarot came from Egypt, and because he thought it did. He had zero evidence. He didn't go to Egypt. We hadn't discovered anything about tarot in Egypt, and we know through all of our previous episodes, tarot didn't come from Egypt. But, you know, because of this essay that he could just like publish and was widely read, everyone was like, oh, tarot holds the secrets of Thoth and the ancient Egyptians. And he had zero basis. So this is a little bit, it's like he tried to do some research, but like more research than Dijebeline, but it's along those lines where he's just like, here's my ideas about how things work, and I'd like it to work like this. Another interesting thing I found is apparently Fraser even said this book was speculative. So, you know, there's a couple reasons why this book isn't academically sound, besides the fact that he admitted it was speculative. But like, first off, he uses only secondary sources, meaning that he didn't go to these places and talk to the people who actually believed in these myths or practiced these rituals. He just like talked to people who talked to people. You know, it's like a gave a telephone. He like talked to people who might have been to that place type thing. And like things get lost in translation that way. Or he like read papers by people who were writing about it. So that was like a big no-no. Let's just be like, I just talked to some people who like have kind of been associated with it. And it's like, that's not the same. But then two, we talked about how he like tried to really force this like stuff, these cultures into his ideas. And he apparently had like a very superiority like complex about it. And was very prejudiced when talking about other cultures, like meaning he really just could not have any sort of empathy or objective viewpoint about how these myths were valuable to other cultures' practices. So everything is described from a very imperialist lens. Like he literally would call other people's cultures like primitive, crude, and savage.
Yeah, exactly. He's not one that we should be basing anything off of these days. We've evolved for the better.
Right. Yeah. We've gotten past that point.
So basically the only idea that has survived from this book is the idea of sympathetic magic, and its two parts: similarity, or sometimes that's called imitative, and contagion. Sympathetic magic is a concept within the realm of magic and folklore that is based on the idea that like produces like, or that two things that are similar in some way are connected and can influence each other. It's a fundamental principle of many magical and ritualistic practices found in various cultures throughout history, but sympathetic magic is typically divided into two main categories: sympathetic magic by imitation and sympathetic magic by contagion. Both forms of sympathetic magic are grounded in the belief that there is a hidden mystical connection between things or symbols and the desired outcome. This belief is definitely not unique to any one culture or time period. It can be found in various forms across the world. Sympathetic magic is often seen as a way to exert control over one's environment or fate and is a central aspect of many magical and ritual practices in different societies.
Okay, so within sympathetic magic, we've got like two branches, the similarity magic and contagion magic. We touched a little bit on contagion magic, and we'll get into it deeper so I have a better understanding of that one. But what's similarity magic?
Okay, so similarity magic is used in a lot of different ways in a lot of different practices. One of the more unique ways was using it to control animals, which I thought was interesting. They would control both the hunted animals and the livestock, to kind of guide that and get the outcomes they wanted with either. But most popular is definitely voodoo dolls, or I think in European folklore they're called poppets. I don't know if that's an equivalent comparison, but in my mind the general ideas are the same for both things. I think we're both familiar with those. The doll represents the person, and whatever you do to the doll, it happens to the person. And then there is candle magic, which I was totally surprised, but it makes total sense. Yeah, so different colored candles are used to represent various desires or intentions, and through the act of burning the candles and focusing one's intent, individuals believe that they can manifest their desires. So like versus like for sure. And one thing that I've always found really funny about candle magic is that the Catholic Church totally does it with their, like, I think they're called votives, and they also bless, votives, and they also bless candles too. I know that they used they used to use like blessed candles during storms to protect their home.
Oh yeah. I think we could find a lot of magic that is used in the Christian church today where they just use new words that don't sound witchcrafty, but when you think about like the rituals they go through, like eating the body and blood of Christ, along with all of these like candles, especially in like the Catholic and Orthodox church, like I think there's some magic influence going on, and it's just been rebranded.
One point to Fraser there. That was kind of his whole point.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but the one that really surprised me was photographs. People use photographs to cast love spells, which makes total sense in the modern day. I mean, we have cell phones in our pockets, so like the best cameras you can get. And so that makes sense for nowadays. But that's not the part. So that's not the part that surprised me. But what did surprise me was that this practice started in the late 1800s.
Okay, but like that's when photography was like invented. Like
I know
that. Like I think the daguerreotype, which is like, I'm sure if you haven't, like, obviously you wouldn't have seen one in person, but they're the ones that the drawings of these cameras are like the accordion looking things where there's like the sheet you put over your head to dive into it. Like they're really big and clunky, and they weren't really like available until like 1860.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's so crazy. That's why I was so surprised. And so I fell down the rabbit hole once again for this one. And I was like, I got to find out how this started, like who started this. But obviously I couldn't find a friggin' solid source.
Of course.
So what we do know is that the late 19th century was marked by the popularity of spiritualism, a movement that sought to communicate with the spirits of the deceased. And many spiritualists used photographs as a mean of capturing spirits or energy. And this may have influenced the adoption of photographs in other forms of magic and divination. But most popularly, photographs were used in love spells.
Interesting about the love spell specific. I have to insert the story of William Mumler real quick. So this guy stumbled on the technique of double exposure. So for anybody who doesn't know what that is, in photography, if you use film, or in this case, film hadn't been invented yet, so he was using these big metal plates, and if you expose them once, if you wait, you can then like expose them again and essentially take a photo on top of a photo. So then when you actually like develop the photo, you can get like these cool, weird overlapping double images. So Mumler accidentally used a plate that had already been used, and he didn't know it, to take like a photo of himself or whatever. He was practicing his portraits. And it ended up looking really spooky because the photo that was taken before he took the photo was of a person. But the way, once like it came out in the like developing process, it looks really ghostly. So it looks like there's like this spirit of a person like haunting him.
Oh!
And at the time, spiritualism was on the rise. And, he showed this to some people, but it like got into the hands of some spiritualists who were like, this is real. Like,
Whoa.
he knew what happened. Like, Mumler was like he was not like spreading these like rumors. Well, no, he was spreading these rumors himself, but he didn't believe in it. It's not like he thought someone was haunting him. He knew what had happened in his photography booth. But once other people saw it, he made a good, solid business off of becoming a medium, quote unquote.
Nice.
And taking these double exposures. And he would tell people like, oh, this is the spirit of someone who wants to contact you, or like an old relative, and all this stuff. So he would just make up these lies, and he made a business off of these like spooky photographs.
Whoa.
I think he was eventually discovered because he took a photo of someone, and the guy he took a photo of knew the other person in the photo and knew that they were alive. It was like, he's like, nah, like that dude's my neighbor. Like, what are you talking?
God.
Yeah, it's one of those. He got caught that way.
Bummer, Mumler. You got to be a little more creative there.
Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me. Like, that's like my hypothesis, is that like, it wouldn't surprise me if this whole shtick of using double exposure to like, quote unquote, reveal spirits might have been like an initial foray into using photography.
Oh, 100%. I think that's totally what happened. Yeah. And also, just so we all know, I have spirit photography on our list of things to cover. I think that'd be so sick. Especially the aura photos. I've always wanted to do one of those.
I got one of those done.
Oh, cool. Lucky duck.
Got real lucky.
So back in the late 1800s, people were getting into all sorts of weird and mystical stuff. And they wrote books and pamphlets about magic and the supernatural. And some of these writings had tips and tricks for using photos and love spells, and other magical hocus pocus as well. It's like they were sharing their magical secrets with a broader crowd.
That's cool. So yeah, the first thing that when you said that, the first thing that popped into my head was like a cover of Cosmo or Vogue magazine.
Yes, it's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it's like, but all the little headlines are like, want to make him fall hard? Try our 5 easy love charms. Or like, are you a good witch or a bad witch? Take our quiz.
That's exactly what was happening. When I was researching it, I got like some names of some of the pamphlets and that sort of thing. I forget what they're called, but they were like the Black Piplin or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
It was super fun. And I was like desperate for trying to find like an online archive of these pamphlets, but there's really none exist.
Dang. We'll have to imagine it. We'll have to make our own.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do our own zine.
Yeah, zines.
And so I think just to kind of summate this, if there's one thing we know about doing this podcast, it's that people are going to find a way to insert magic into any new invention they can.
100%.
So contagious magic to me is kind of fun. It's like the funnest. This is what kind of sparked this whole episode. And to me, it seems so like chaotic and unhinged compared to sympathetic magic or to imitative magic. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of examples of situations where two people are active participants in the ritual and it's kind of like a calm situation, a lot of, consent mutually going on. But my first thoughts when I think about this kind of magic is like two crazy best friends sneaking into the ex-boyfriend's apartment to steal from the hairbrush, to cast a love spell, and everything just kind of turns into a comedy of errors from that point. The other like pop culture references that come to mind is The Conjuring and Ed and Lorraine's room full of like haunted and forbidden objects.
Yeah, we just keep those hanging around. Yeah, I've also never seen like an example in pop culture of consensual contagion magic.
Right, I know.
Or like sympathetic magic too. Like either one, it's all still about like, except for the candle magic. When you brought that up, I'm like, that one has been, I've seen that used in like positive, benevolent ways.
Right.
But almost always it's just like someone trying to hurt someone else. And you're like, is there any good use for this? Like, has anyone used this to like help cure someone? Like,
yeah, for sure. That would be a pretty good topic to explore someday in depth. What is the relationship magic has with consent?
Well, yeah, in pop culture, not much. But yes, but 100%. Yeah, that would be that'd be a great one to, because there's certain types of magic I think that if you're trying to be ethical, you would not practice.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like a relationship tarot reading spreads. At some point, maybe let's not.
Ooh, yeah, I have personal rules around trying to predict other people's thoughts and feelings when you could just talk to them.
Right. So there's many different ways that practitioners use contagious magic. Many cultures have practices for protecting against the evil eye, a malevolent gaze believed to bring harm. And in these practices, objects such as amulets, charms, or symbols are imbued with protective properties through rituals and then worn or displayed to ward off harm. The belief is that the object can absorb and neutralize the negative energy, making it an example of sympathetic magic by contagion. In voodoo and hoodoo practices, sympathetic magic by contagion is common. Personal belongings or bodily fluids, which is gross.
Well, magic wasn't formed during a time when we had, like,
Hygiene.
Hygiene practices that were regular.
Yeah. So, hair, nails, or blood of a target person are used to create a connection and exert control over that individual. This can be used for both positive and negative purposes, including love spells and curses. But I think you mentioned this earlier, in some folk healing traditions, practitioners use objects that have come into contact with a person to diagnose or treat illnesses.
Yeah, so we just mentioned that. So, like, that's good to know that it was used at some point to help people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it took me a minute, I think, because I was getting used to these phrases of sympathetic magic by contagion. Like, just sounds like wait, hold up. My brain was just like, wait, what? So yeah, contagion is the body part. And the doll created with the contagion, aka with the body part, is the sympathetic part of the magic. To break it down for everybody at home who's trying to keep track.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, listening to this, I was like, wait, no. Let me replace the words. Yeah.
Yeah, so the sympathetic part is like versus like. So sympathetic is anything like the person or thing you're trying to get. And then contagion or imitative are just the modes of transportation.
Yeah, the pieces.
So my personal favorite of this sort of thing is grave dirt.
Oh, okay. Grave dirt.
People think that the dirt carries the power and essence of the deceased and can be used in various magical and healing practices. Unfortunately, this also includes like items taken from burial grounds in general, which is not cool, and we don't condone that.
No, grave robbing's not like a thing we're cool with. Yeah, I've seen enough horror movies also to know not to mess around with stealing from any grave or graveyard. But when you said that, it kind of made me wonder now that like cremation and other forms of, I guess disposing of your body, like composting now is an option. Like, grave dirt's going to become like a rare ingredient. Like, it might be harder to get your hands on some of these things the more we like advance our technology for how we decompose, I guess.
Well, and also, is it just a rare ingredient now? Because everybody's in these like 2-foot layers of, what do they call them? Coffins. And their bodies don't decompose for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's true. They're not like just putting bodies straight into the dirt. So it's, I guess they're there. I guess if you believe that like I guess it depends on what you believe. This is all dependent on like how you believe that the essence of the person who has died seeps into the earth around it. But yeah, we're usually pumped full of so many chemicals.
Exactly.
When we're, like formaldehyde that like we don't decompose for a long time.
Yeah, I knew somebody who used to work in a graveyard. She would like coordinate, everything and that sort of thing, and also be like the liaison for the families. And she had some pretty wild and strong-held beliefs on what should and should not be done with your body when you die. And so much so that I was like, what kind of shit have you seen?
Yeah,
but we never got that far in the conversation.
Oh boy, yeah, that would have been my immediate next question. Like, so no matter what happens, I need to know why, because she's clearly seen some stuff.
Exactly. But by far the most interesting is witches' bottles.
Oh.
In European folklore, witches' bottles are containers filled with various materials and were believed to protect the household from curses or malevolent magic. Malevolent magic always gets me, man. It's
a tongue twister.
Yeah, it really is a lot of mouth moves. The idea was that the items in the bottle would absorb negative energy directed at the household.
These sound like spell jars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I bet these are like the predecessor to our more modern spell jars. But these, my understanding is that witch bottles were more specifically used as counter magic and were usually made by like folk healers or white witches. So we kind of mentioned in a previous episode how cunning folk were distinguished from witches, and that like cunning folk were basically the good witches and witches are just bad or something. Witches are just bad. The word witch was always meant to mean you're evil back in the day. And I think that was our episode on familiars where we mentioned them. But witches' bottles are something like a folk healer would make because it's meant to protect from the evil and the witch.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a countermeasure there.
Protection charms.
Exactly. So witches' bottles were most popular during the 16th to the 18th century. They contained a variety of items thought to have protective properties. Common ingredients included pins, nails, needles, thorns, herbs, salt, and protective stones. Sometimes, if a person thought that they were cursed, bottles would also include personal items of theirs, like hair, fingernails, or urine to help remove the curse.
Oh, yay, the bodily fluids part.
Oh, yeah, no thanks.
It's a little much. It's a little much for me. So I looked more into the urine thing because apparently that was like a super common bodily fluid. Yeah. Apparently urinary problems were pretty common in the 17th and 18th centuries. So people thought that the cause of these issues were witches. And so the thought behind using the urine of the person who was sick is that it would essentially like return to sender, like cool, like send this back to the witch, so that way like the ailment would then be reflected and transferred back to the witch that supposedly caused it.
Oh, that's so funny. That makes sense. I always think about like if I were in 1800s and thinking on how many UTIs I've gotten in my lifetime, like I would have been dead by 15.
Oh, 100%. Like, yeah, there's a reason everybody died so young. Like,
yes, and the pain. Like, you'd have to live with that pain without any sort of relief from that. I would have opted out. I don't want to do that.
It's like, this is good. We're cool.
Yeah. I had a good 15 years.
Yeah, a solid 15. Listen, you probably would have, like, kicked out a kid by that point, too.
Exactly. Probably several. So witches' bottles were typically made from glass or ceramic and were often sealed with wax, cork, or another type of stopper to prevent the contents from escaping. The choice of bottle varied, and some bottles had elaborate designs, while others were more utilitarian. Once created, the witch bottle was typically buried or hidden in a location near the property that they were meant to protect. Some witch bottles had inscriptions or symbols on the outside, which were believed to enhance their protective power. These inscriptions might include protective charms, prayers, or the names of the intended target's enemies.
Ooh. So, yeah, basically everything that's included in a witch's bottle has some, like, symbolic meaning. I've read a few different interpretations of the pins, because that was another, like, super common one, and sometimes the pins or nails would be bent. The most common interpretation I've seen is that the pins would, like, impale or cause pain to the witch anytime they tried to cast spells on the person that the charm was protecting. It's kind of like it activated it, and it's like, oh, they'll feel pain.
No thanks.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't like reading about this sort of stuff. It makes me feel weird in my body.
Yeah, it's a very visceral reaction.
So the coolest part of the whole thing is that the witches' bottles have been discovered in archaeological excavations of historic sites in Europe and the Americas, surprisingly. In 2011, archaeologists in 2011
I love this. We need a supercut of all the times things are mispronounced and be the best.
I know, truly. In 2011, archaeologists excavating an area near Pendle Hill in Lancashire, England, discovered a well-preserved witch's bottle dating back to the 17th century. The bottle contained human urine, bent pins, nails, and nail clippings. The discovery provided evidence of the continued belief in witchcraft during this period, as Pendle Hill is associated with the infamous Pendle witch trials of 1612.
So many of those.
Yeah, truly. Oh, God. During renovations at Knoll House in Kent, they stumbled upon a witchy surprise from the 1600s. This old bottle was packed with pins, nails, some bits of leather, and a mysterious liquid that no one could quite figure out. What was it?
That's upsetting to me.
I know. What's cool about it is that it was found in a fancy upscale house, showing that even the rich and famous folks had their share of superstitious beliefs about witches and curses. So yeah, it wasn't like witchcraft was just a thing for regular folks. It was pretty universal back then.
I would almost think that should be like more embraced by rich folks because they
Right.
have, well, more reason to potentially have curses placed on them, given that, like classism isn't great for like
Yeah, absolutely.
promoting brotherly love when it comes to that time. When like you
Good
think of the
old classism.
Yeah, classic classism. But yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially, I always think about those like, I guess I don't know if it's real or not, but I think of the movie Penelope when she had the pig nose.
Yes, yeah.
And that was a rich family who was cursed generations and generations ago. So it really does seem like the rich should
They're
really
targeted.
yeah, they're targeted for sure. So what's cool is that witches' bottles made their way over to America in the late 18th century and have been discovered in quite a few places, but most commonly in the like actual house foundations. Isn't that crazy?
That's super cool. Yeah, I started to, when like I saw you mention this, I was like, I'm gonna read up on that. So this was the folk practice that actually made it all the way to North America, which was awesome. That people were like, as they were immigrating, they're bringing their cultures over. So that's why we found a few things over here, a few of these witches' bottles. But we also mentioned that witches' bottles were used to clear curses. They were also made as like preemptive measures. Like it's not like you just needed to clear a curse. So that's kind of what these witches' bottles that are found in foundations are for, because they'd be made as in just like an overall protective charm against evil. And they were either built into the foundations of the home or they'd be buried like under where the hearth would be. So that, and the idea is that like anytime the fire was lit, it was believed that it would like activate the pins and send away or like disintegrate any evil that was trapped inside the bottle. So like that was another
so
thing.
wild.
Yeah, it's like they believed like, oh, any evil like will be attracted to the bottle because of all the stuff that's in there. Like I think I read one of those other interpretations of urine is that it like attracted evil or like witches, so that way it's like imagine like a fly zapper for evil curses. Like
Fly zapper.
They're like, oh yeah, we love this thing, and it's like, and then the evil gets trapped because of the pins, and then the fire is lit and it like burns away the curse, basically.
That's an amazing comparison. A fly zapper for evil curses.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that kind of does it. It was really cool to read about this, but
yeah, we'd love to hear if you use any form of similarity or contagion magic. We won't tattletale on you if you don't get consent.
Right, exactly.
But like, if you do have benevolent ways of using these things, we'd also love to hear about that.
Yes, for sure. And don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and if you want to let us know, the Tarot Tangents email is now live.
It's live!
Yeah, so feel free, tangents@mysticfooltarot.com if you want to tell us a story.
Nice. I'm here for it.
So don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If you're a fan of the podcast, we need you to do this so we can find new fans. We do. We need you desperately.
Can I start singing Sarah McLachlan's like I Will Remember? Like this is an
Yes.
SPCA ad. Like I will remember you.
$1 a day feeds an animal for life.
I'm the animal. It's me.
So tell your friends, follow us on all socials. Our handles are Sweet Death Inc. and Mystic Fool Tarot on all platforms. See you later.
Bye.